waters, and with this class is going to be on evergreens, and the part of my point is to get you out of the paradigm of thinking about conifers and evergreens. But I'm also going to go over care, how to put them to bed for winter, and why some of the other stuff, root food and things like that. So we'll have a little bit of fun with that, some fun facts that'll keep your brain working on some of those things. But I need to say to the people online that we're short a cable, so I'm not going to grab the laptop and point to some of my favorite trees. So we're going to miss some of that. But, all the more reason to be here as opposed to being online. And then we'll go into some questions afterwards, or, midway through. However, if I get to a lull, I'll answer questions. So that's how it works out. So inside of your conifers, you have a lot of evergreens. And that's what, when someone says evergreen, the first thing they think of is a pine tree of some sort. And I want to encourage you to think outside of that box and think about evergreens that are not conifers. And some of my favorites that kind of go along with pines, just because I think of winter and pines, your hollies are really, this is one of the dark green ones. They like a little bit of shade. They're an understory, good for underneath your pines. But this is as dark evergreen as it's going to get. It's not really a molter where it loses its place as it's putting them on. That's a term that I think is fair for the show. Molting, where it's putting on its new growth as it's leaving its old growth. And that's considered an evergreen. And one of my favorites in that category. So there's about 7 or 8 different species of cotoneaster, and a good portion of them are evergreen. This is one of the monsters, and it's also called cluster berry or cluster flower. But this will go a really pretty color of burgundy in the fall, and then as it's losing its leaves, it's putting on its new leaves, and it's considered an evergreen. It's a really, really pretty plant, and one to incorporate. Now, it will act as like a pyracantha, which is also an evergreen, and has cluster berries and cluster flowers, but just doesn't have any needles, any thorns. And they'll both get 8 foot tall if you let them, and they just take up a really neat spot in the yard. The little berries attract birds, and the flowers will attract everything a flower attracts. That's kind of an aside. I get this fairly more frequently than you'd suspect. I want something flowering, but I can't have any bees. Well, that's just not going to happen. I mean, even if you get a silk plant, my sarcastic, passive aggressive answer is go to Michael's and buy a silk plant. Well, because I don't want to water it, but I want it green all the time, and I want flowers, but I don't want bees. Okay, well, if it's red or anything else that mirrors the flower, the bees are going to come and check it out. They're looking. It's not always scent, it's UV, but I know I go on the side. So here's a fun one. Since we think about pines as an evergreen, and pine wood is relatively soft, right? Well, I build furniture. And you know what the definition of hardwood is? Deciduous. A hardwood is from a deciduous tree. So, fun fact, balsa is deciduous. Not very hard. You want to think big flowers, evergreen, rhododendrons. Also a shade plant. Really, really, this is 5 or 6 foot plant. In the corner, in the shade, and in the spring, it's like you will have neighbors stop you and ask you what it is. Great big color. We've got out of balance alkaline in our soil and in our water, whether you're bringing it out of a well or it's coming through the city. So you're going to have to acidify this soil. Our planting mix has compost in it that will up the acid, but I would just buy some acid. Humic acid is my favorite. $59. Okay, this I want to address the tags because it's monsoon sale, and if nothing else, you should leave with something because this means when they're not getting them back until spring, and it's the end of the line for these. Uh, this is when you stock up on this stuff. You'll see the tags all over. Some of the trees will have yellow. It's not a function of the price is going down again or anything like that. It's just that's the color of tape we had when we were pricing. And I encourage you to not take this tag and put it on a plant that doesn't have a tag on it. That's common, and there's rationale. We got a lot of plants or whatever. Sealing's not good. That's what it is, and it's a family business. So if it helps you feel guilty about it, you're sealing from a local family if you do that. So let's not do that. This is a great evergreen. This branch conveniently broke off. This is called a silverberry, and it'll get 7 or 8 foot tall if you let it. And it's nondescript flowers, no big deal. It's got a silver underside, which is cool in the wind. Part of what makes this unique is this lighter color under the leaf is a signal to deer and bugs that this doesn't taste good. So it's a real formidable plant. Yes, it will do with less water, but anytime you give something less, it grows less. So if you want something to get big, then you feed it and water it. That brings me to now, with your planting when it's warm, you got to water the snot out of it. Whatever the requirements are, don't. It's not the time to buy a juniper that's indigenous to the area and plant it and treat it like it was left out in the woods. It's just not going to make it. Most of them are not grown as out in the woods and then gone and dug up. So they don't know that kind of care, even though the species, they're not saying, yes, I'm a juniper, I don't need anything. They're saying, I'm on a drip system my whole life in perfect soil and a perfect growing environment, and you stuck me out in the yard and turned the water off. And that's what you're going to get, either dead or very slow growing, if at all. Your red symphonia is a great evergreen. And I encourage you to mix this stuff with your conifers, because that's what makes an interesting yard. You want a conifer collection. We'll show you some really interesting conifers here in a little bit, but nothing shows off a blue like a dark green. And or a dark green with some color on it. This is a Nandina, heavenly bamboo. I really don't think it's a bamboo, but I forgot to look that one up, sorry. This is a beautiful plant, well cared for. If you slow down on the water and the food, you get something that's really spindly. And we have about 4 or 5 different species of these at any given time. I didn't check the inventory, but there's purple, there's a tall one, there's a short one. Just read your tags. But it is an evergreen. This is one of my favorites as well, and I like it for a couple of reasons. This is a wax leaf privet, and that's his winter color, just dark green. So it's a great thing to plant. So you're going to come and get some perennials that are going to die to the ground. Your any of the low tick seeds or salvia gregae or whatever. This is your evergreen background, taller, 6 or 7 foot tall, real easily. And then that's your color is in between this and the house. So this is your background during the summertime when you have that bright yellow, bright red, or whatever. This does have a white flower on it, and it is fragrant as opposed to the red tip petunia. You'll know something's in bloom in the yard, and you might even be able to hear the bees when you're close to it. But it's not really a smell that you want to bring into the house. It's not. This is a very nice scent, and they'll get huge if you let them. The other thing is the growth patterns. We talked a little bit about how fast stuff grows. Well, a lot of it is how well you take care of it. And these, when we get into the bigger trees, but if you buy bigger shrubs, less frequently, deeper. You want to water deeper, and don't miss your quarterly if you're off a week or two, it's not going to matter. But feed these guys quarterly. Keep some food in them. Your soil here, not only is the pH out of whack, but it doesn't have any organic material in it. Before the town became the town, the place was burnt on a regular basis by natural causes. The buffalo and the antelope ate everything. Go out and wander around. It's very rare to find a 200-year-old tree here. And that's because and any ones that were straight were cut for building the town. So there's not 1,000 years of decomposing forest on the ground, but this decomposed granite that we call our dirt is full of minerals. It just needs a little bit of organic material and some acid to release that, and it's full of nutrients. So, but water deeply and less frequently. When the plant says it wants 15 gallons of water at a time, that's not 5 gallons 3 times a week. So this time of year when it's warm, you want to water every other day. And you have to. It's a different kind of acid. Phosphoric acid is a root food, and it is the side effect is flowers. So the center number on your fertilizers. He asked about acid. I had mentioned acid earlier, and now about getting your soil adjusted properly. And it is not the same acid as the humic acid that is created in mulch. As mulch breaks down, it creates humic acid. One of the reasons why gypsum and sulfur work up here is because as they break down, they become acid on their way out. And that's, I just go for the jugular and I buy humic acid instead of waiting for it to break down. I found it a lot more effective than gypsum for long-term breaking apart the clay. Either. Yes, sir.
When you're planting one of these things,
yep.
It's a good idea to take a couple of scoops of gypsum and mix it in with soil.
Throw it at the bottom of the hole. Gypsum in. The question is it a good idea to mix gypsum with your soil when you're planting the plant? And the answer is yes. I don't use gypsum anymore. I use humic acid. But we carry gypsum and we carry sulfur soil because they work in different areas for different reasons, and they're historic. Like my dad used them all the time, and that's what I'm going to buy. You know, I'm done listening to you. Just give me the sulfur soil. That's great. But they work. Part of the non-science of what this industry does or should do more of, if it's working for you, don't change it. Don't try what I suggest when what you're doing works just great. Yes, sir. No, it is not. Broken up wallboard, drywall is gypsum originally, but it's cooked. So it's no, yeah. It might have an effect. I've never really tried it that much, but when I read about it, because I happen to have, I remodel stuff, and I thought, what can I do with this besides throw it away? So, back to evergreens that are non-conifers. Your euonymus. Sunrise because of the yellow and white. Now there's, again, inside of euonymus, there might be some that are deciduous. I'm not aware of them, but you can see the difference in the yellow and the white pretty plainly. Because the soil is, again, not to be the broken drum, but I don't buy the yellow, and it's a personal preference. If you don't get your acid just right, then they don't look as healthy. The whites don't seem to suffer like that. But because you're a captive audience, you're subject to my personal opinion, and if you like yellow, that's great. Inside of that silverberry, there is a gilded edge, and it's gold. It's yellow, but they want to call it gold. And I don't have any right now. I'll look for them, but it's a magnificent plant for color, and it's yellow, and I plant them in my yard. It's a beautiful plant. Another couple of surprises: hawthorn, and there'll be 3 or 4 heights of hawthorn. The giant one will get giant, and the Daphne or ballerina will stay small. This is a ballerina, so small is 3 foot. This one's going to bloom again, but typically a big midsummer, early summer bloomer, pink flowers. But this is evergreen, which is really a terrific evergreen. It's not, you're not going to have a bunch of sticks sitting out there. Dogwoods. Now, a fun fact about dogwoods: dogs and dogwoods don't match, don't mix well. When they don't handle the urine. So if you have a male dog and he lifts his leg to it, you'll get a big brown spot. It won't necessarily kill the plant unless it's like his fire hydrant and he goes all the time on it. But it'll make it unsightly, especially if you're using it for a hedge. So historic fun fact is these were not in the British gardens. That's all those mazes and things like that. They weren't dogwoods. They were done with flowers, and in between taxing and poverty cycles in Europe, the people who took the gardens over found this cheaper and easier to care for, so they went with those. They're fun to see, go to them, but it's not how they were originally planted. Something else that is evergreen that people aren't thinking: evergreen. Most of your cactus, your agave, your yucca. This is a soft leaf yucca. One of the differences between a yucca and an agave is the yucca will bloom every year once it reaches maturity, and the agave will bloom when it reaches maturity, and the main plant will die. So you have to plant that knowing that going in. But that's evergreen. It'll look just like that after 2 feet of snow. Those are great. And they're on sale. Did I mention that we have a sale going on? This is in the conifer family, but it's got some fun things to talk about. These are called arborvitae. And again, there's a green giant. Literally, that's the name. And emerald green and stuff like that. There's some really, really pretty contrast in the shape of the leaf. You can see these are kind of extremes here. If you, just be careful where you put this. One, it's a great plant, but this is the one of the conifers that the deer and javelina like. So you will now notice this as you drive around, since we've talked about it. Your arborvitae that are in the front yard, they'll all be neatly trimmed up by the javelina and the deer. They don't seem to like them enough to stand on their legs and eat any higher, but they'll eat the bottom stuff. Maybe it's the new growth. The yew, Y-E-W, cool little red berry on this plant that is a neat color contrast. This is a creeping yew. There's giant yews. There are some that get enormous, but you want a dense evergreen that's not real sticky. This is relatively soft, even though it looks like it could be tough. Real tough plant though, real durable, very, very nice plant on the edge of being a conifer. Your English ivy. You want to cover a wall or create a wall, put up some hog panel and put English ivy all over it. This is an evergreen, and it'll get as thick as you let it. The caveat with some of these, this one and the Vinca major. You see the Vinca minor, often called periwinkle, which is an evergreen, and had little periwinkle colored flower on the ground. Beautiful. The Vinca major has a bigger leaf and will climb your trees. And so that's fine if you stay on it, so that you cut them off at a particular level so that they're not all up in there, because then it gets expensive. This will climb your trees. But a really pretty backdrop used appropriately. This is a fun one, and again, one of my favorites is called Mahonia, or Oregon grape holly. It's not a holly, it's in the barberry family, and it's a molter also, which means it's dropping its leaves while it's putting on new leaves. this will have at any given time of the season, yellow, a real deep gold, bright red, blood red leaves on it as it's molting. It doesn't have to be winter and spring to be doing that. When the spring comes, it puts on this great big clusters of yellow flowers that are really fragrant. It's really a neat plant. You have to read the labels because there's several different heights of them, and they do put off runners, so be aware of that. But it'll have it after the flowers go. It has a berry that is purple, hence the name Great Holly. This is another beautiful evergreen. This plant, you'll think someone left the tag on when it's in bloom. The flowers look just like the tag. They're enormous. The red and yellow is one of my favorites just because of the contrast. There's a pink, there's a white camellia. And this will get pretty good size, 7 or 8 foot if you let it. Makes a good potted plant in a very big pot. But this one's shade. Got tag, but it's evergreen, and it blooms in the winter. So if you got a porch that gets a bunch of shade and you want some color as you're walking up to the door, better than a silk plant. And then you get your textures, right? Where this guy is a true mounder. And again, in opinion, when you're farther away from the house, you can have some higher, low-growing junipers. But up here, I got a Mojave rattlesnake off my front porch 2 days ago. And they're, when you get the things that grow 2 and 3 feet, that's kind of an invitation for the rabbits and the mice to make it in. You know, it's spiny enough. It's really good protection for them, but that's meal tickets for rattlesnakes. So just be aware of that. Get the lowest ones and then punctuate it with something that's got a different color and different heights. So this, I believe, is a mugu. Yeah. So there's also a dwarf Scotch pine. And you see how dense this new growth is on these? This is, when you cut these, it doesn't just split. It puts out like 5 and 6 branches. These are we call them candlesticks. And that's going to be your new growth. So as long as that's your new growth for the year, then it'll settle down and that will start to put on its little needles in between. And then you'll get the candlesticks again, and that's its growth rate. I have a neighbor who has this in her front yard, 24 years old, and they're now 8 foot tall. So, but as opposed to 24 years on an Oregon green that will give you a foot a year, that's going to be 24 feet added to the 5 or 6 feet that already is. So she didn't keep them in a ball. She let them go. I think they're stunning. They're really neat. They look like an 8 foot bonsai because they've got this quirky dwarfism to them. And they take up just enough space to block her front door from the road. It's really, really a pleasant look. These, any of your junipers, you'll see your low grow junipers, and they'll, but read the tag, because some of them, on the tags, please ask somebody that's here. We don't trade out the tags. We don't modify the information on the tags. And some of the stuff, anything on our lot is here for Zone 7. We pick only stuff that grows here. That doesn't mean you can't kill it. It just means that it should survive if it's cared for. I don't believe that the growers are exaggerating on their growth rates, but they're writing them down because they're growing them where they're growing them because it's a perfect environment for this plant. So you're taking them out of that perfect environment, you're putting them in Preston. It's not going to grow as fast and oftentimes not as big. So some of your low growers that say a foot, you'd be elated to get 6 or 8 inches out of it, which is a really nice height for a ground cover. There's some that are carpet that really want to stay low. Those are indestructible. I mean, you can't hurt them, and I'll go over how to hurt them in a minute. But take your growth rates that are on the back a little bit, just diminish them a little bit. It's not, it's highly, this one says he wants to get a foot tall. I'd be surprised if he gets a foot tall. You're going to lose the bucket. So that's the ground level. So that's important. You're talking specifically about these low junipers. Okay, so how to fertilize the low juniper, and they're not doing well. First question, what comes to mind is how old are they? There's a couple of things. I'll just go into how to take care of your evergreens and how to get them ready for winter and have a better spring. Inside of this, any of this might be a good example. You see the size of this bucket? This is 100% mulch. They're grown in a perfect soil. And mulch is designed to break down and feed the soil, thus feeding the roots. So 3 to 5 years from now, you're going to have air pockets around this plant, unless it's in a potter, because this mulch will have broken down. And you'll start seeing stress. And I'll put a bunch of water on it, I feed it, I can't seem to bring it back. And they do decline. There's a fungus that gets in these once they get weak. Get a bag of topsoil. If the plant is 4 or 5 years old, whether it's an aspen or a creeping juniper, get a bag of topsoil. That's the finest part of the mulch mixed with sand. And you throw your fertilizer or granular fertilizer around the base, find the base of the plants. If you have big mounds of them, there could have 3 or 4 plants in there. And they don't root out. They all grow from that one main root. So you go to that area, you pour some fertilizer around it, pour some topsoil, and water it in. And you'll see the sand fall into the soil. You'll be activating the fertilizer by starting to dissolve it, but the sand will be taking up the air pockets that have formed around the roots. Very important for winter. During the summertime, when you have air pockets and you're trying to keep it wet enough because it looks puny, you end up with root rot because you have whole air pockets under the ground with moisture. And in the winter, your roots can get cold in an extreme. So one of my first things to do without sending you home with a bunch of chemicals and $100 bill is a bag of mulch or a bag of topsoil. And you can do that on almost any of the plants that you put in the ground. The other thing that I like to use, and I do use frequently, is our root and grow. It's an organic, it's not a B12 or a growth hormone. It's like Hershey syrup for the roots. And if you get healthy roots, then you'll have more than likely a healthy plant. Most of this stuff is pretty disease resistant, but once it starts to show signs, it's almost out. So it's very difficult to bring some of the evergreens back once they start to go downhill because they're so hardy, they're hiding it, and then all of a sudden they just give up the ghost. But a healthy root system will allow them to combat it. Everybody gets all scared about the boring insects getting into the pine trees and stuff. Well, the boring insects are always with us. You know, they have horrible communication skills. They can't tell a funny joke. No, they're boring insects. Come on, try it. So they're waiting for the tree to not be able to sap. They bite the tree, the sap suffocates them. And if the tree isn't healthy, or the shrub isn't healthy, then it can't suffocate them and the bugs win. So you keep them healthy. And even your big monsters that are in the yard, if you don't get the monsoon rain, go throw a little bit of light dose of fertilizer underneath it and turn the sprinkler on and give them a drink to keep their hydration and their sap levels up. And so inside of all that, if you want to do a disease resistance also comes from variety in your yard. If you plant a wall of a particular plant and the bug that likes those plants gets into them, then you just set up a salad bar for that bug. So, but if you mix your conifers or any of your other plants, then it's, the bug stops there and it's easier to kill and easier to keep from spreading. This is a Bosnian pine, and these are real hardy here, and you should get 8 inches to a foot a year out of these, provided they're watered well. And the reason I brought this one up is because it's kind of in between the Oregon green and the Austrian pine, which I didn't bring one up because they don't have any little ones, or I do, they're back over there. They might have a tag, they might be on sale, but the Austrian pine has an open needle formation, and the Oregon green keeps this bottle brush, and this is kind of in between. It's not as dramatic of a difference as a blue. Now, this is actually an Arizona cypress. I think it's only a couple of years to the market. But this particular cultivar, which is the scientist of planting, creating cool plants, they've hybridized this so it's narrow. It's not the Charlie Brown Weeper, right? But it is a narrow, and it is a blue. And the Arizona cypress is one of the faster growers. You get 2 feet a year out of this plant, provided it's watered properly. And it makes a great contrast in color with an evergreen. So mix them up. And because this guy's got a tower shape to him, a column shape to him, he can be in the middle of the row, he can be at the end of the row, by the mailbox down at the end of the driveway. That can be your directional. Another reason why I brought this is because this is a common, you see the brown on the inside on this? You see the brown, the browning? Evergreen on the conifers can also be said, you can also call them always dropping, as opposed to dropping all at once. You can't go under a pine out in the forest without finding a bunch of needles, but the tree has still got its needles on it. So as it grows out, it will lose center stuff. That's not a sign that something's wrong with the plant. It's just growing. Lack of light, and it's dropping those leaves that are no longer doing what's necessary. This is one of the softest leaf conifers. This is called a Vanderwolf. And next to a driveway, feel of that. This is a magnificent plant. And the color is really cool. And the cone on this is one of the bigger cones. It's real long and narrow, and great for grandkids stuff. Really, really cool plant. That guy, of course, is the Oregon green. That's one of my favorites. And I had this guy sitting up there so you could see. But again, if you put two evergreens in the conifers, think about textures and colors, because you don't have to give up being evergreen for it to be, all looking like a Christmas tree. Your Fat Alberts and some of your other things, read the label. They're going to look very Christmas tree-esque. If that's what you want, then get that. But use these. I encourage you to use them as backdrops for your perennials. And then I take mine off the ground a little bit because, again, I want the coyotes to be able to hunt under my trees and not have critters hide. So and rats are the nemesis, but rabbits are every bit as bad, even though they're cute, but they still wreak havoc on my yard when there's nothing else to eat. And I just assume the coyotes eat them as opposed to me trapping them or something. Yes, ma'am. So what's a mature width on this particular cypress? It's only 4 or 5 feet. So like that, but 30 feet tall.
that all Evergreen sectors do that way?
No, that is not. That's why I brought this one. There's not all Arizona cypress are that. This is a columnar, and there's also a couple right at the end of this row right here that are column Scotch pines. And I saw one the other day behind I think it's behind Jen's over there on 69 in Prescott Valley. And he's in somebody's yard. He's about 4 foot round and probably 25 foot tall and stunning Scotch pine, as opposed to just those big monsters. But take a little bit off the bottom. So most of these, most evergreens, with the exception of maybe some of the citrus, which we won't bring in up here because they are evergreen, but they don't handle the winter. You can get by with doing a drench. And this makes the tree toxic to your boring insects. And it's a true systemic. So you mix it up in a bucket according to the instructions on the label. It's based on the girth of the trunk. And you pour it around the base of the plant. Don't try and figure out where the drip line is. Don't pour it on the trunk. Just go a little bit out. And a couple of applications, depending on the size of the tree. But it makes the plant toxic to the insects. I don't like to use it on my peach trees, even though you can after the fruit's gone, on edibles. But on evergreens, shrubs, and your trees, this is a great product. I'm trying to get you to keep them healthy on the way. And if you're paying attention to them the first several years, you'll end up with some really magnificent trees. The horticultural oil, some people like to use neem oil. A lot of different companies will use different oils. It just needs to be able to mix with water. And this one is actually canola oil. So it doesn't have to be neem oil to be a horticulture or a dormant oil. What this product does is suffocate the larvae of the bugs that are on the bark. And to go a little deeper on this, it's effective enough to kill a lot of things with exoskeletons because it clogs their pores and they can't breathe. They breathe through their shell. You don't want to be putting oil on your plants when it's hot. So everybody, I'm just using neem oil. It's healthy. I feel good about it. You're really suffocating your plant. And they aspirate or breathe, and they can't have their pores clogged. During the winter, they're not breathing as much, and you have scale and a bunch of other things that plant their eggs. As winter's coming, they plant their eggs on the bark and on the branches, and this will effectively suffocate those eggs. So you can get a jump on spring. You can use oils in the fall and winter and in the spring before new growth starts, fruit trees, anything, and then stop and use some clean pesticides. But if you use your drench and this, you've gotten way ahead of the game without being out there hosing everything down and putting a bunch of stuff into the air. If you decide that that's what you want to do, and these are very effective, sayonara, kind of a clever name, bye-bye bugs, but pyrethrins, permethrins, there's all kinds of organically based, they're synthesized, but they break down so fast that they're not as bad as some really nasty stuff like your tobacco-based products. A lot of your toxins are really high tobacco-based products, so they'll just kill everything. But this oil is the contact killer. You want to spray this stuff at night. There's nothing wrong with going in and hosing down the inside of your evergreens every once in a while, just to make sure, preventive maintenance. If you see the little spider webs on them without an actual web, those are spider mites. The more dense your plant, the more prone they are to that because they don't have the circulation on the inside. The spider mites like those dense plants. The dwarf Alberta spruce, that real small one, 10 foot's a big one. They're real dense. They look just like a little Christmas tree or an Arturo Fuente short story cigar. But the oils are bad. This is a good one, all right? Because break down immediately. And this is a really neat attachment because this is the concentrate. It mixes in here. So your concentrate's not getting the water that causes it to break down until it is coming out. And if any water is coming out of this spout, it'll have the pyrethrin in it. So it's the pressure of your hose. That if you want to get a very large tree and you have a well, you won't have a problem with that because the city controls your water supply. Pressure. Spinosad and BT. This is one of the more recent finds. It's a bacteria that kills bugs. It also is really good for fungus. But this was discovered in mulch bins in the Caribbean for the sugarcane plant. And it's pretty clean stuff, but it will kill bugs. And in a different formula, it'll kill your fungus, but it's clean. When you're reading some of these and you see a bacillus, that's what the B stands for in the BT. This is specifically for non-vertebrates. It's caterpillar kill. It'll kill the caterpillars, but it won't kill the bird if it picks up a slow caterpillar. Very rarely do birds eat sick bugs, but they will if you catch it shortly after it's sprayed. But the BC, this is BT. That's a clean product if you get some bugs and stuff growing in there. This is what we were talking about earlier as far as your fertilizers go to get you a really good growth rate in the spring. These candlesticks that happen on your conifers, like this is this year's new growth. So that's probably 9 inches in a pot. It comes out looking like a really fluffy, neat little thing called candlesticks. And then they start to leaf out, if you will. They start to get their needles on them. Even though it doesn't drop its leaves, even though these don't drop their leaves, the only time that the roots are able to grow for themselves, they're always growing and working. But they're supplying the plant with the nutrients from the fertilizer and the water and all this other stuff. They're working hard, except for during the wintertime. Phosphate's still good to feed them all year at the right dosage. But if you want to put them to bed right, put them to winter right, then give them some root food, which is the center number on your fertilizers. That is phosphate. And this is a granular, and anything from mountain laurel, crepe myrtles, peach trees, anything that's going to bloom. If you look at your flower food, ours is called Flower Power. The center number is spiked at like 48, and it's to keep things blooming after you buy them. This will give your roots a really nice lift, and your spring will be a whole lot healthier. Instead of going, oh, it's time for his candlesticks to put out, I'll feed him. Give him some stuff before, and you'll get better growth in the spring because it'll be stored up already. Yes, just throw it around. That's not. This does not need to repeat the question. It doesn't need to be turned into the soil. You just throw it around. This one and the humic acid is I buy with the intent to empty the bag. There's 2 ways this stuff won't help you. 1, if you leave it here, and 2, if you take it home and leave it in the bag. So just go out and put it under everything during monsoon, but I really like this granular in the fall. That's really a good product for what you're trying to accomplish. So, fall. Yep. Questions? Yes, sir. Well, that's a good question. Do we feed quarterly? Do we feed something different each quarter? Feed quarterly, yes. Don't feed something differently, you augment. So our fertilizer, because we've developed this fertilizer, it's 744. It's relatively light and it's organically based. Because we don't have a bunch of organic material in the soil, if you go with a chemical fertilizer and you spike all the numbers like 20, 20, 20, that's petroleum byproduct, which is fine. Everybody should have a little oil and gas in their portfolio, just not in their peaches. So in the spring, you give them a little extra nitrogen. In the fall, you give them a little extra phosphate. Nitrogen is the green and growth. And then as you see the trees throughout the year, you might have to add, some iron or some acid. I usually go with, we have a great example here. This young lady had brought us some maples. She couldn't get it right. And I couldn't give her the right answers because my first go-to is acid. If it's yellow or you didn't get the bright red out of your maples, that's an acid issue. Like seeing her leaves, it wasn't right. So finally, I think maybe you got the right acid, the right iron. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes, sir.
What would be the signs of too much nitrogen or too much phosphate?
Well, it's really hard to tell on too much phosphate, except for you might get some burning on the outside of the leaves, and that's just a chemical, not necessarily phosphate. Too much nitrogen is too fast of growth. Your leaves are too far apart on your trees. Your tomatoes get really big and you get no flowers. That's a good question. Too much nitrogen. How do you see it in the plant if you're giving it too much chemicals? Well, that's why we go with lighter and organic. It's harder to burn. Also, as a caveat, please don't buy the fertilizers or the soils that have fertilizer already in them, because you don't know how fast that is working its way through the soil. And it's very difficult then to come back and say, I bought this dirt, it's got 20 in it, and my plant looks like this. Well, I'm afraid to put more nitrogen on it because it has 20 on it, so try and just keep it simple and add the fertilizers as we diagnose the plants. Yes, sir.
Back to the Nandina, you said there was a reason why they grow spindly, not really leafy. What was that?
Well, the Nandina can't. Why would it go spindly? One reason is just neglect. You don't cut it, and it'll just want to keep growing up. One is species, because some of them want to stay small and bushy. But if you bought a house and they were tall and thin, and you have 3 or 4 stalks, I would take 2 of the stalks and cut them in half and feed and deep water them. If they look like they've been in the ground for a long time, get some topsoil around the base and see if you can get that. Though, instead of cutting them all down and none of them coming back, cut a few of them and see if you can get it to thicken up like that.
Was it water was part of it?
And, yeah, it's just a combo. It's a lack of water, lack of consistent food. Everything that you buy in a nursery is probably, whether or not it has time release in the soil depends on the grower. But they will have dilute fertilizer in their water daily. So they're being fed all the time. And you take them home and go to a quarterly routine, especially if they're flowering when you buy them, they're going to show some decline. Maybe just the best case is they just lose their flowers. But you got to start feeding them right away. Yes, sir.
The gel-filled cold packs that shippers use to ship food or biscuits or something, I understand they contain a lot of chemicals.
I don't understand the question.
Okay. If you get cold food or medicine shipped from a shipper,
Uh-huh.
they fill the cold packs.
Yeah.
The packaging. I understand they contain a lot of nitrogen. Some of them say very low.
Just do your homework. I wouldn't be the one to. Please don't quote. Yeah, that's not. Yeah, but that's just like this stuff, because I say read the instructions. If I were to tell you that you need 8 gallons of this per 1 gallon of water, then I will be quoted with that as the example. So I try not to use teaspoons, anything. You have to read the instructions on your own. But on that, the original crystals, the water crystals that hold the water in the ground. Before that came out, we were taking those out of diapers and putting them in the bottoms of people's garden. And then they came out with impregnated capsules that held the water, the Aqua Boost product. And then they came out with capsules that had fertilizers in them. You put them in the bottom of it. All kinds of experiments before it got there. What I suspect is they're saying this is a natural product. Don't feed it to your pets, but it's okay to throw it in the yard. Just like the peanuts now. Can I use peanuts in the bottom of my planter so I don't have to buy extra potting soil? Well, most of the peanuts nowadays are rice, so it's not going to help you. And because it's going to dissolve as soon as it gets wet. But put a heavy rock to weight it down, but just buy the extra bag of potting soil. You buy a $30 plant and you want to save $5 on potting soil, and it won't be as good as having dirt. So, yeah, buy the plant on sale and put the money into dirt. Yes.
Back to the.
Yep.
So how large is the largest?
10 foot.
10, okay.
And it's as big as you feed it or you let it get. In these growth rates, it's important. How big does a giant Indian hawthorn get? And they'll get enormous. Is my answer. And the growth rate, people will buy. They'll say, "Oh, this Vanderwolf's going to get 30 feet tall. I don't want a 30-foot tall tree, so I'm not going to get it." Okay, a foot a year. That one's 4 feet in the ground. So 26 years from now, it'll be 30 foot tall. How old are you, man? So, I be cognizant of that. Unless you're leaving and you're not going to be here for 5 or 6 or 7 years, you're not going to suffer from the big plant. Get the plant that you like for now. Look at the growth rates. If you take really good care of it for the next 7 or 8 years, 10 years, be realistic about how old you are and what you're going to get. If you want a big tree now, we'll get some big trees in for you, and happy to do that. But don't buy it because in 20 years from now, it's going to be bigger than you want. You own the clippers, and if I make it to 85, I'm going to be delighted, and I'll just cut them down if they're in the way. Yes, ma'am.
If you use the
I do. Yes, if you use a 744, should you use the superphosphate, and do you put it on everything? And yes. The only thing I really don't put the 744 or the phosphate on as a separate augment is an alligator juniper that was already there, or a manzanita that was already there. If I bought a manzanita in a bucket, that manzanita does not know the forest. Perfect example of a species that should make it without care, but not that plant, because he doesn't know that. All he knows is he was grown in a greenhouse or in a field, and he's been on a drip since life began, and he eats and feeds well. So, and you put that in the yard next to your indigenous manzanita and don't water it, it's not going to make it. So yes, I will do on my indigenous stuff. The first house I had up here was off the Copper Basin, and I was on the edge of the forest. I wasn't quite there. It kept getting thicker as you went down the streets. But the ponderosas and the alligator junipers and all the manzanita, the silk tassel plant, all of those guys, I would just give them a little bit, and if it didn't rain, I would water them. But it was always on a real dilute. It was more just trying to keep them strong. Most of these guys, like the manzanita, self-pruning. Why did he just lose a couple of branches? Well, because he didn't think he could handle it. So he didn't want to carry them anymore, and he just lets it die. That's why. It may not be disease, it's just self-protection. But if it's not indigenous, and I say, it was there before you bought the place, or it was, they're acclimated to the alkalinity of the soil. And water can't hurt them, and a little bit of food can't hurt them. But if I buy the 744, I don't like it sitting around the house. The 744 does have some I think it's got guano, bat scat, and chicken scat in it, and so the dogs like it. So I throw it around a few, and I hose it into the ground as I'm going, so that they won't be scratching on it, tasting it. But yes, I put it on everything, and I buy the phosphate in the fall and put it on everything that I have planted. in the bed, in my butterfly garden bed, I will just throw it over the whole thing. My trees, I just walk around and put handfuls underneath. I'm sorry, what was that? Oh, well, that's if you need it. You'll see. Yeah, if you want to augment something more than just the fertilizer, in the spring, I'll put nitrogen on most stuff, but you can get it through our fertilizer on your quarterly or adding some extra mulch to the top. There's chicken scat. There's all kinds of ways of getting calcium nitrate is used for how do you get extra nitrogen in your soil? Calcium nitrate is sold for vegetables, so they won't get blossom end rot. And that's where the flower falls off, hence the blossom. And you get a brown spot. People think it's a bug, and it's a calcium deficiency. Well, your tomatoes and your squash will all be sweeter if they have more calcium. Well, calcium nitrate, when it breaks down, goes straight to nitrogen. And so, again, if you buy a potting soil that's impregnated with nitrogen and you give it calcium because you have blossom end rot, you're setting yourself up for having to buy a product that slows the growth down of the plant so it will bloom. And you just start chasing stuff. And your tomatoes become what I call whole food tomatoes. They're expensive. Yes, ma'am.
Our rhododendrons, I bought them this year, wanting to experiment with it.
Uh-huh. Well, bring in a couple leaves. We've got a microscope. We'll look at it. Yellow and brown in the middle of the leaf. The brown could be sunburnt, but with the yellow, it might be a fungus. Yeah, they're not. Rhododendrons are not finicky. That's the question. They have specific wants. They want to be in the shade. If they're going to get direct sun, it should be only morning, and they want acid. So you get some humic acid and throw it underneath there. Coffee grounds are fine, but you need bags of coffee grounds, not just what's left in yours in the morning.
Is sulfur the same as that the same thing?
It is not the same. Sulfur is not the same thing as humic acid, but it is good for them because it does break down to be sulfuric acid. So sulfur will work if you have it. If you have to buy something and you need to make a choice, I would buy the humic acid. If you have the sulfur at home, use it all. I don't like to throw stuff out before you move on. Yes, sir.
If you've already got the plant and it's established, that's just putting that on the surface.
Sure it does.
Period of time.
Sure it does. If you have,
Right?
if you've already planted the plant and you have the gypsum, does it help to throw it on top? Absolutely. Up here, because your pH in your water's out of balance and your pH in your soil's out of balance, the gypsum will actually break down to be sulfuric acid. If you think you're in a well, like you planted in clay, and you run a piece of rebar out into that, you have your root ball and you have the zone where you mix the soil. You run a piece of rebar down the bottom of the hole and pull it out. And if it's gooey on the bottom and stinks, then you in a clay bed, you can actually rock that bar around, put holes and pour the gypsum directly in it. You're not going to burn it with too much gypsum. You bet. And it will help. Something else? Yes. Yep. No, on the yuccas, they might put off some pups when they're ready, but this particular softleaf yucca has a stack of flowers on a single stalk. The petals are fun to put in a salad. You know, they're edible. The white petals of the flower, and it'll set some seeds on there, but it's not. It doesn't. It takes a lot of the energy away from the plant, but I'd rather let it bloom and then cut it off. If you cut it off before it starts to set seed, then that saves a bunch of energy. That's just part of the reproduction. It'll put it into the roots instead of trying to make seeds. So you can cut the stalk off when it's finished blooming. The agaves, it puts everything into it. Doesn't matter how much you water it or feed it. If you don't want the bloom and you want the plant, as soon as it starts to bloom, it'll start to spread in the center a little bit, and you'll see that. You can cut the bloom off, and you might get a few more years out of the plant, but you won't be able to enjoy the bloom, and it'll just start to send out a bunch of runners trying to reproduce. It's just its reproduction cycle. Some of the agaves will go up, and after the flowers, it'll actually have baby plants, and they'll just fall over and start to root. You can pull those off and put them in a damp napkin and get them to start to root and put them in pots and just get going. Knowing that that plant is, all those little babies are the same age, so they're all going to bloom at the same time. So that makes actually a really dramatic setting. If you can have a bunch of agaves bloom at the same time, those spires all together, pretty phenomenal if you plan it, if you have the time. Yes, sir. Oh, what type of fertilizer do I recommend for cactus? I buy ours, but I just do it super light. And the cactus are, the opuntia or the prickly pear is the one that's more susceptible to moth that gets in the pads. You'll see the white on the pad. That's a critter that's inside eating. And that's a problem I'll use. I'll use a systemic and pour it around the base of the plant if I'm not going to eat the tuna, is what they're called, or the fruit. Those the pears are called tuna. But that'll kill it. Your agave aren't as susceptible, or the agave are more susceptible to a moth that gets in the roots, and more so than the yucca. But you'll be able to tell if your leaves start looking kind of puny, then you grab a hold of them and wiggle them. And if they come off easy or they are pliable, then you got a problem in the roots and you need some toxins. Yeah. The diatomaceous earth will the diatomaceous earth help with the fungus on the cactus? I don't think so. It's for bugs, and it's a little bitty sharp pieces that get stuck in bugs with exoskeletons like ants and roaches and grasshoppers, and they breathe through those joints and they suffocate because they've got that stuff. It's very clean. It'll keep bugs out of it, but they're really durable. It's not. Yeah, you can throw it around the base of anything. It's not going to hurt anything. If you've got it, that's one of the few things you can actually store. Because it's non-toxic, doesn't stink, doesn't matter if you have it in your garage. Yes, sir.
Dried chicken manure pellets.
Yeah, nitrogen.
How much of that do you use around, say, a 5 gallon?
The dried chicken pellet manure is nitrogen. It's got some, and it has some acidic qualities to it as well. And how much to use is I would rather, so I plant thick and I thin out. On my fertilizers, I go light and I add as I think I need it. So that one is tricky because if it's dried, it should have been broken down enough. Some of that stuff they sell gets too hot, which means it actually generates heat to break down, and that is pulling nitrogen out of your plant and out of the soil, out of your mulch to generate that heat to break down. And then it re-releases it, but you can actually damage plants by putting stuff that's not. It's like wood chips versus mulch. You put wood chips down, throw some of your your chicken scat on it, and then it'll take the nitrogen from the chicken scat rather than from your plant. So I think I'm done. Y'all all right? Can I help anybody else? Get a plant, something with a tag on it on the way out. And phosphate in the fall.
If I